The iron door of the holding bay screeched open, and 2 Krellian guards shoved Derek Foster forward with enough force to send him stumbling across the grimy floor. He caught himself against the far wall, his palms scraping against the rough metal surface. Behind him, the guards' chittering laughter echoed through the chamber like broken machinery. Derek had learned to keep his head down during his 8 months on Station Omega-7. The mining operation sat on the edge of explored space, where galactic laws were suggestions rather than rules. Here, humans were curiosities at best and slaves at worst. He'd survived this long by being useful, by fixing equipment the other species couldn't, by staying invisible. But today felt different. Human. The lead guard, a massive Krellian named Throck, stepped into the bay. His 4 arms crossed over his chitinous chest as his mandibles clicked in amusement. "We have gift for you." Derek turned slowly, keeping his expression neutral. Gifts from the guards were never good. Last month, they'd given another prisoner a ration pack filled with spoiled protein paste just to watch him get sick. The month before that, they'd given a Valorian worker a day off, and then beaten him for not reporting to his shift. "I don't need anything," Derek said carefully, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. Throck's mandibles spread wider in what passed for a Krellian grin. "Not asking what you need. Telling what you get." He gestured with one of his upper arms, and the second guard dragged something forward. "No, not something. Someone." Derek's breath caught in his throat. It was a child, small and broken, being pulled across the floor by one thin arm. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 in human years, though her species aged differently. Her skin had a faint silvery sheen, marked with intricate patterns that Derek recognized as silent heritage. The patterns were supposed to glow softly, he'd heard, but hers were dim and flickering like dying stars. Blood matted her white hair. One of her legs bent at an unnatural angle. Her breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps that made Derek's medical training scream in alarm. This child was dying. The guard dropped her in the center of the bay like a sack of ore. She didn't even cry out, just curled into herself with a small whimper that cut through Derek's chest like a blade. "This one is broken," Throck announced, gesturing at the girl with casual cruelty. "Station master says dispose of defective property. But we think why waste?" His mandibles clicked rapidly, the Krellian equivalent of laughter. "We give to human. You are soft species, yes? Always talking about feelings and mercy. Now we see what human does with broken thing." The other guards had gathered at the doorway now, at least 6 of them, their insectoid eyes gleaming with anticipation. This was entertainment for them. They wanted to see if Derek would show the weakness of compassion, or if he'd prove himself strong enough to ignore a dying child. Either way they won. Either they got to mock human sentiment, or they got to prove that humans were just as cruel as any other species when it mattered. Derek's hands clenched at his sides. Every instinct he'd developed for survival screamed at him to walk away. Don't make waves. Don't draw attention. Don't give them a reason to notice you. But he couldn't. He physically couldn't. He'd been a trauma surgeon before the transport ship he'd been traveling on got raided. He'd spent 12 years in emergency rooms, pulling people back from the edge of death. He'd taken an oath once in a hospital on Earth that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. First, do no harm. The girl's eyes opened just a sliver. They were violet, the color of Earth lavender fields at sunset, and they were filled with more pain and fear than any child should ever know. She looked at him, and in that moment, Derek saw his own daughter's face superimposed over her alien features. Sarah would be 9 now. He'd missed 2 years of her life already. He didn't even know if she remembered him. The girl's lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. But he didn't need to hear them to know what she was saying. Every dying patient said the same thing with their eyes. "Please, help me. Don't let me die alone." "So, human?" Throck leaned forward, his voice dropping to a mock whisper that still carried through the entire bay. "What you do with broken gift is garbage, yes? Or maybe you prove you are civilized, put it out of misery?" He held out a small shock blade, the metal glinting under the harsh overhead lights. The other guards chittered and clicked, placing bets in their grating language. Derek heard the words clearly enough. They were wagering on whether he'd kill her quickly, ignore her, or try something stupid like helping her. Derek took a step forward. His legs felt heavy like he was walking through deep water. Every eye in the room fixed on him. The guards fell silent, waiting to see what the human would do. He knelt beside the girl, and she flinched away from him with a small cry of terror. Of course she did. The last hands that had touched her had broken her bones and torn her flesh. Why would she expect anything different from another stranger? "It's okay," Derek whispered, keeping his voice soft and gentle despite knowing she probably couldn't understand English. "I'm not going to hurt you." He reached out slowly, telegraphing every movement. His fingers touched her shoulder with the lightest pressure, and he felt her trembling beneath his palm. She was so cold. Too cold. She was going into shock. "What is this?" Throck's voice boomed with confusion and contempt. "Human shows weakness already? Pathetic." Derek ignored him. He slid one arm under the girl's shoulders and another under her knees, careful to support her broken leg. She weighed almost nothing, light as a bird. As he lifted her, she made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a sigh, her small body going limp against his chest. He could feel her heart beating, rapid and irregular, fluttering like a trapped moth. She was minutes away from cardiac failure if he didn't do something. Derek turned toward his cell, the girl cradled against him. Behind him, the guards erupted into raucous noise, some laughing, some shouting in anger, some simply stunned into silence by the audacity of what he'd just done. "You choose death, human?" Throck called after him. "When broken thing dies, you die with it. This is price of your softness." Derek didn't respond. He just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, carrying his burden toward the tiny cell that had been his prison for 8 months. His mind was already racing through medical procedures, calculating what supplies he had, what he could improvise, what miracles he'd need to pull off to save a dying child from a species he barely understood. He felt her small hand clutch weakly at his shirt, her fingers barely able to hold on. In that grip, Derek felt the weight of a choice that would change everything. The guards had meant this as a cruel joke, a way to humiliate him. Instead, they'd given him something he'd lost months ago in this place, a purpose beyond simple survival. They'd given him someone who needed him, someone he could help, someone worth risking everything for. As the cell door closed behind him and he laid the girl gently on his narrow bunk, Derek Foster made a silent promise to the broken child trembling before him. He would save her, no matter what it cost him. Derek laid the girl on his bunk as gently as he could, but she still whimpered at the movement. Her violet eyes squeezed shut, tears leaking from the corners and tracing silver paths down her pale cheeks. He needed to work fast. Her breathing was getting worse, more labored with each passing second. The cell was barely 3 meters square, with a bunk, a waste unit and a small storage locker. Derek had spent months collecting anything that might be useful, trading his meal rations for items other prisoners considered junk. Now he pulled out his makeshift medical kit, a pathetic collection compared to the sterile surgical suites he'd worked in back on Earth. He had clean rags torn from his spare uniform. A bottle of industrial alcohol he'd traded for last month. Adhesive strips meant for equipment repair. Wire that could serve as sutures. A broken scanner he'd fixed that could detect internal bleeding, though it only worked half the time. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. Derek's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking her vital signs as best he could. Her pulse was thready and weak. Her breathing shallow. That broken leg was the obvious injury, but he suspected worse damage beneath the surface. The silent had delicate bone structures, he knew that much. The guards had been thorough in their cruelty. "Okay, sweetheart," he murmured, knowing she couldn't understand but hoping his tone would calm her. "I'm going to help you. This is going to hurt, but I need you to stay still." He started with the leg. The bone had snapped cleanly, which was a mercy. Derek had nothing for anesthesia, nothing to dull the pain. He hesitated, looking at her small face twisted in agony, and felt his heart break a little. Then he remembered his training. Pain was temporary. Death was permanent. He set the bone as quickly as he could. The girl's scream was high and piercing, cutting through the constant hum of the station's machinery. Derek worked through it, his jaw clenched, splinting the leg with pieces of metal he'd straightened and padded with cloth. Her scream faded to broken sobs, and he whispered apologies she couldn't understand. The hours blurred together. Derek cleaned wounds, applied the harsh alcohol as antiseptic, and used his repair adhesive to close the worst gashes. The silent physiology was different from humans, but trauma was trauma. Blood needed to stay inside the body. Bones needed to be straight. Infection needed to be prevented. Around midnight station time, she finally stopped crying. Her eyes were open, watching him with a mixture of fear and confusion. Derek met her gaze and offered a gentle smile. "My name is Derek," he said slowly, pointing to himself. Then he pointed to her, raising his eyebrows in question. She stared at him for a long moment. Her lips moved, forming a soft sound. "Kiraan." "Kiraan," Derek repeated, and her eyes widened slightly. "That's a beautiful name. You're going to be okay, Kiraan. I promise." He didn't know if she understood the words, but she seemed to relax a fraction. Derek pulled his thin blanket over her, tucking it around her small frame. She was still shivering, still in shock, but her breathing had evened out. That was progress. Derek sat on the floor beside the bunk, too wired to sleep. Every few minutes he checked her pulse, monitored her breathing, made sure she was still with him. As the night wore on, he began to talk to her. It didn't matter that she couldn't understand. The sound of a calm voice was therapeutic, something he'd learned long ago in med school. He told her about Earth. About oceans that stretched to the horizon, blue and endless. About forests where trees grew so tall they seemed to touch the sky. He told her about his daughter Sarah, about how she loved to collect rocks and insisted each one had its own personality. He told her about summer rain and the smell of fresh bread and the way snow fell silent and soft in winter. Kiraan's eyes never left his face. Slowly, gradually, the terror in them began to fade, replaced by something that might have been curiosity. When dawn cycle arrived, marked by the harsh buzzer that signaled work shift, Derek's cell door slid open. He tensed, expecting guards, but instead found Merrick, a Valorian who worked the processors 2 levels down. The reptilian alien glanced nervously down the corridor before stepping inside. "You are full human," Merrick hissed, his forked tongue flickering. "Whole station talking. You took the broken one." Derek straightened, positioning himself between Merrick and Kiraan. "She's not broken. She's hurt. There's a difference." Merrick's scaled head shook in what might have been exasperation. "No difference here. Overseer's already making bets. They say you failed, girl dies, then you die too. They're watching you, Derek. Waiting." "Let them watch," Derek said quietly. His eyes were hard, a look that had made nervous residents back down in the ER. "I'm not going to let her die. Your compassion will kill you both." Merrick pulled a small package from his work pouch and thrust it at Derek. "Here. Nutrition paste. Is formulated for young Silent. My daughter before she—" He trailed off, his throat working. "Just take it." Derek accepted the package, his anger softening. "Thank you, Merrick. I mean it." The Valorian was already backing toward the door. "Do not thank me. I was never here. Inhuman? The girl, Kiraan, she understands more than you think. Silent children learn languages fast. Keep talking to her." After Merrick left, Derek turned back to find Kiraan's eyes open and watching him. He knelt beside the bunk and carefully spooned some of the nutrition paste into her mouth. She swallowed weakly and he felt a surge of relief. She was eating. That was good. Over the next 2 days, other prisoners came. Never when guards were near, always quick and furtive. They brought things. A Torvin brought a heating pad that actually worked. A Helix brought medicine for pain, stolen from the station's veterinary supplies. An old Krelian, one of the few who'd shown Derek any kindness, brought clean water and a warning. "Thrak is angry," the old one whispered. "He expected easy death. Expected easy victory. Now he looks foolish because human succeeds where he wanted failure. Be careful, Derek Foster. Angry Krelian is dangerous Krelian." Derek understood. By saving Kiraan, he'd humiliated the guards. He'd turned their cruel game into a demonstration of their own heartlessness. They wouldn't forgive that. But when he looked at Kiraan, saw the way her patterns had begun to glow faintly, saw the way she tracked him with her eyes and even managed a small smile when he told her a funny story about Sarah's pet cat, Derek knew he'd made the right choice. On the 3rd night, as Derek was changing her bandages, Kiraan spoke. Her voice was soft and hoarse, but the words were clear. "Thank you," she said in heavily accented but unmistakable English. "Thank you, Derek." He felt his eyes burn with tears he couldn't afford to shed. Instead, he just squeezed her small hand gently and smiled. "You're welcome, Kiraan. You're going to be just fine." Outside his cell, he heard the heavy footsteps of Krelian guards on patrol. He heard their chittering voices discussing the human's pet, and how much longer the broken thing would last. They were watching, waiting, hoping for failure. Derek didn't care. For the first time in 8 months he felt like himself again. Not a prisoner. Not a slave. A doctor. A healer. A man who'd chosen to do the right thing even when it cost him everything. And whatever came next, he'd face it knowing he'd saved a life that everyone else had thrown away. By the end of the first week, Kiraan could sit up without help. By the second week, she was eating solid food and her broken leg had begun to mend in ways that surprised even Derek. The Silent healed faster than humans, he discovered, but only when given proper care and a reason to fight. The reason Kiraan fought was simple. She trusted Derek completely now. She followed him everywhere his work assignments allowed, limping on her splinted leg but refusing to stay behind. When he repaired ventilation systems in the lower decks, she sat nearby and watched with curious violet eyes. When he ate his meager rations, she shared them without him asking. And every night, she curled up on his bunk while he told her stories about Earth until she fell asleep. But the thing that confused the guards most was Derek's medicine. Throck arrived on day 9 with 3 other Krellians, their mandibles clicking in agitation. They found Derek in his cell, carefully applying a green paste to Kiraan's healing wounds. The girl sat calmly, no longer flinching at his touch. "What is this?" Throck demanded, pointing at the paste with one of his 4 arms. "What primitive substance you put on broken thing?" Derek didn't look up from his work. "It's medicine. Antibiotics, actually. Prevents infection." "Antibiotics?" Throck leaned closer, his insectoid eyes examining the green substance with suspicion. "This looks like mold. Like rot from waste systems." "It is mold," Derek confirmed, finishing his application and wiping his hands clean. "Penicillium or close enough to it. I've been growing it in a corner of the hydroponic bay. Mold produces compounds that kill bacteria. We've been using it on Earth for over 400 years. The guards exchanged looks of disgust and disbelief. One of them, a younger Krellian, chittered something in their language that made the others laugh. Throck's mandibles spread in contempt. "Human uses rot to heal? This is why your species is primitive. You understand nothing of proper medical science." Derek finally looked up, his expression calm but his eyes hard. "And yet she's healing." "Your proper medical science," said to throw her away. "My primitive methods are saving her life." Kiraan, understanding enough of the conversation now, pressed closer to Derek's side. Her small hand gripped his shirt, and her patterns glowed brighter, a sign Derek had learned meant she felt safe. Throck stared at them both, his chittering growing agitated. "This should not work. Broken things stay broken." "Not when someone cares enough to fix them," Derek said quietly. The guards left, but Derek knew they'd be back. He was proving something they didn't want proven, that compassion worked better than cruelty. That was dangerous knowledge in a place like Station Omega-7. The real trouble started when Kiraan began walking without her splint. Derek had fashioned her a crutch from scrap metal, expecting her to need it for weeks. But the silent physiology surprised him again. 3 weeks after he'd set her leg, Kiraan stood up one morning and walked across the cell without limping. Her broken bones had knit together perfectly, stronger than before. Derek checked her over, amazed. On Earth, a fracture like hers would have required months of recovery. But Kiraan's bones had regenerated with an efficiency that made him wonder what other capabilities her species possessed. "You're incredible," he told her, grinning. "A medical miracle." Kiraan smiled back, her English much better now. "Not miracle. You good doctor. You care. That makes difference." But her recovery made the overseers furious. Word spread through the station that the broken silent child was walking, working, even laughing. Prisoners whispered about it in the meal halls. The human had done the impossible. He'd taken something the overseers had declared worthless and made it valuable again. Made them look weak, foolish, and worst of all, wrong. On day 23, Throck returned with the shift supervisor, a massive Krellian named Voss who rarely left the command levels. Voss's carapace was darker than the others, marked with scars from decades of violence. He was the one who truly ran the station, everyone knew it. The official station master was just a figurehead. Derek was teaching Kiraan basic mathematics when they arrived, using pebbles he'd collected to demonstrate addition. She was a quick learner, eager to understand everything about the human who'd saved her. "Human Derek Foster," Voss's voice rumbled like grinding stone. "Stand." Derek stood slowly, positioning himself between Voss and Kiraan. The girl peeked around him, her patterns dimming with fear. Voss studied them both with cold, calculating eyes. "You have created problem. This one was meant to die. Was entertainment. Was lesson about weakness and mercy. But you use your primitive human methods and now she lives. Now other prisoners talk. They say if human can save broken child with rot and cloth, then perhaps we waste resources. Perhaps cruelty is not efficient." "Perhaps they're right," Derek said, keeping his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. Voss's mandibles clicked once, sharp as a gunshot. "You defy us. You make us look foolish. This cannot continue." Throck stepped forward, his forearms flexing. "We give you choice now, human. Simple choice. You abandon the silent. You throw her back to us. We finish what should have been finished weeks ago. You do this and you live. You continue to be useful." Derek's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse? Then you both die," Voss said simply. You taught her to trust, to hope, to believe in kindness. We will make you watch as we break her again slowly and then we break you. This is price for defying entertainment. This is price for showing weakness. Kiraan understood enough to gasp. She grabbed Derek's hand, her small fingers trembling. Derek, no. Please. I go. You stay safe. Derek squeezed her hand and looked down at her. This child who'd been beaten and broken, who'd been thrown at him like garbage, who'd learned to laugh again despite everything. She was willing to sacrifice herself for him, just as he'd been willing to risk everything for her. He looked back at Voss, and in that moment, every compromise he'd made to survive on this station felt like ash in his mouth. He'd kept his head down. He'd followed orders. He'd been invisible and compliant because that was how you stayed alive. But some things mattered more than survival. No, Derek said clearly. I won't abandon her. Do what you want to me, but I won't give her back to you. Throck moved forward, but Voss raised one arm to stop him. The shift supervisor studied Derek with something that might have been curiosity. You choose death for principle? Voss asked. This is human nature? This is being human, Derek corrected. We don't give up on people just because it's convenient. We don't throw away lives just because they're difficult. And we don't abandon the ones who trust us, no matter the cost. Kiraan was crying now, her face pressed against Derek's side. Around them the cell felt smaller than ever, the walls closing in. Derek could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears, and he wondered if these would be his last moments of freedom before the punishment began. Voss stared at him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, the supervisor's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Interesting, Voss said. Very interesting. You have 3 days, human. 3 days to reconsider. After that, we come for you both. Think carefully about your primitive human principles and whether they are worth dying for. The guards left, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. Derek sank to the floor, his legs suddenly weak. Kiraan climbed into his lap, still crying, and he held her close. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. No sorry, Kiraan said fiercely, her small arms wrapping around his neck. You saved me. You good. You best person I know. I not let them hurt you. Derek closed his eyes and held her tighter, knowing that in 3 days, neither of them might have a choice. The 3 days passed too quickly. Derek spent them teaching Kiraan everything he could. He taught her more English words, more mathematics, more stories about Earth. She absorbed it all with desperate intensity, as if learning could somehow protect them from what was coming. They both knew it couldn't, but they pretended anyway. On the morning of the 4th day, Throck came with 6 guards. They didn't speak. They simply grabbed Derek and dragged him from the cell while Kiraan screamed and tried to hold on to him. One guard shoved her back roughly, and she fell against the bunk, her violet eyes wide with terror. Don't watch, Derek shouted at her as they pulled him into the corridor. Kiraan, close your eyes. Don't watch. But they made sure she watched. They dragged Derek to the central work bay where all the prisoners gathered for shift assignments. The guards had cleared a space in the middle, and they threw Derek down on the metal floor hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. When he tried to stand, a shock baton hit his ribs and sent him sprawling again. Throck's voice boomed through the bay. All prisoners attend. All prisoners witness. This is what happens to those who defy order. This is what happens to those who show weakness. Derek looked up through blurred vision and saw them. Dozens of prisoners from a dozen different species, all forced to watch. And there, held by a guard at the front of the crowd, was Kiraan. Tears streamed down her pale face, and her patterns flickered wildly with distress. Kiraan, close your eyes, Derek tried again, but his voice came out as a wheeze. She didn't close them. She stared at him, her small body shaking. Voss stepped into the circle, his massive form blocking the overhead lights. You had choice, human. You chose poorly. Now you learn price of primitive compassion. The first blow caught Derek across the face. The second hit his stomach. The third, fourth, fifth blurred together into a cascade of pain that seemed to have no end. The guards took turns, methodical and thorough, making sure every prisoner could see exactly what happened to those who defied the station's brutal order. Derek tried not to scream. He didn't want Kiraan to hear that. But pain had a way of tearing sounds from you whether you wanted it to or not. He heard his own voice crying out and hated himself for it, hated that she had to witness this, hated that his choice to save her had led to this moment. Through the haze of agony, he heard her. Kiraan was screaming his name, fighting against the guard who held her, trying to reach him. Her voice broke with desperation, and it hurt worse than any blow the guards could deliver. Then something unexpected happened. Stop this. The voice came from the crowd. Merrick, the Valorian who'd brought nutrition paste weeks ago, stepped forward. His reptilian form was trembling but his voice was steady. This is wrong. The human saved a child. That is not weakness. That is strength. Throck whirled on him. Back to your place, Valorian, or you join him. Then I join him, Merrick said and stepped into the circle. For a moment, silence filled the bay. Then another voice spoke. I also join. It was the old Krellian who'd warned Derek about Throck. He walked forward on shaking legs and stood beside Merrick. And I. A Torvin female moved from the crowd. I as well. A Helix male. One by one, prisoners stepped forward. Different species, different backgrounds, different reasons for being on Station Omega 7. But they all shared one thing. They'd seen Derek choose compassion over survival, and something in that choice had awakened something in them. Within minutes, over 30 prisoners stood in a circle around Derek's broken body, facing the guards. They didn't have weapons. They didn't make threats. They simply stood there, a living wall of defiance. Voss stared at them, his mandibles clicking in confusion and rage. You all choose death? For one human and his broken pet. Not pet, Merrick said firmly. Child. Living being. And not just for him. For principle. You make us into animals here. You tell us only strength matters, only cruelty survives. But he showed us different. He showed us that caring for each other is strength too. Throck raised his shock baton, but Voss stopped him with a gesture. The shift supervisor's eyes swept across the gathered prisoners, calculating. This wasn't just a few rebels anymore. This was a movement. This was dangerous. Before Voss could respond, alarms blared through the station. Red lights flashed, and an announcement crackled over the speakers in formal galactic standard. All station personnel stand by for inspection. Administrator Qualix from the Galactic Mining Commission has arrived for scheduled review. All supervisors report to docking bay immediately. Derek heard Voss curse in the Krellian language. The shift supervisor grabbed Throck's arm and pulled him back. Get medical unit. Fix human enough that he stands. Hide damage. Now. The guards scattered, leaving Derek on the floor. Merrick and two others carefully lifted him, and he couldn't hold back a groan of pain. Everything hurt. His ribs were probably broken. His face felt like raw meat. Blood dripped from his mouth onto the floor. Kiraan broke free from the confusion and ran to him, sobbing. She pressed her face against his chest, careful to avoid his injuries, and Derek managed to raise one shaking hand to stroke her hair. I'm okay, he lied. I'm okay, sweetheart. They carried him to the medical bay, a small room usually reserved for fixing prisoners just enough to return them to work. A bored Valorian medic scanned him, injected him with something that dulled the worst of the pain, and wrapped his ribs tightly. You are fool, the medic muttered, but there was respect in his voice. Magnificent fool. 2 hours later, still barely able to stand, Derek found himself in the station master's office along with Voss, Throck, and several other supervisors. Administrator Qualix sat behind the desk, a tall Quarian with silver skin and 4 intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Qualix had been reviewing reports when Derek was brought in. The administrator looked up, and Derek saw those 4 eyes narrow as they took in his battered appearance and the small silent girl clinging to his hand. Explain, Qualix said simply, gesturing at Derek. Voss started to speak, but Derek interrupted. The pain medication and exhaustion had burned away his caution. He had nothing left to lose. They threw her to me as entertainment 3 weeks ago, Derek said, his voice rough but clear. She was dying. Broken bones, internal bleeding, deliberate torture. They wanted to see if I'd show weakness by helping her or strength by letting her die. Qualix's eyes fixed on Kiraan. And you chose to help. I chose to be human, Derek corrected. We have this primitive idea that every life has value. That children deserve protection. That healing is better than hurting. I know it's not efficient. I know it's not logical. But it's who we are. He swayed on his feet and Kiraan grabbed his arm to steady him. Derek looked at the administrator directly, knowing this might be his only chance. You can kill me for it if you want. You can throw us both out an airlock. But I won't apologize for saving her life. I won't apologize for showing her kindness when everyone else showed her cruelty. And I won't pretend that survival matters more than being a decent person. The office fell silent. Qualix studied Derek for a long moment, then looked at Kiraan, then at the supervisors who stood tense and angry against the wall. Finally, the administrator spoke. Tell me, human. In your medical opinion, what caused this child's injuries? Derek felt his heart pound. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. He took a breath and told the truth. Systematic torture designed to cause maximum pain without immediate death. Based on the pattern of fractures and the healing timeline, I'd say it lasted several days before they gave her to me. Voss's mandibles clicked in anger, but Qualix raised one hand for silence. I see, the administrator said quietly. That is very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Administrator Qualix stood from behind the desk, and the movement made every supervisor in the room tense. The Quarian was tall, nearly 2.5 meters, and carried an authority that made even Voss look small by comparison. I arrived on this station expecting routine inefficiencies, Qualix said, walking slowly around the desk. Perhaps some minor safety violations. Equipment problems. The usual difficulties of frontier mining operations. The administrator stopped in front of Kiraan, looking down at the small girl who pressed herself against Derek's leg. I did not expect to find evidence of torture and attempted murder of a child. Voss's mandibles clicked rapidly. Administrator, the human exaggerates. The silent was simply injured in an accident. We gave her to the human as an act of mercy to see if he could. Do not insult my intelligence, Qualix cut him off, all four eyes now fixed on the shift supervisor. I have reviewed this station's records for the past hour. I have seen the surveillance footage. I have read the medical reports that you tried to delete but were automatically backed up to commission servers. The administrator gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the air. Derek recognized the footage immediately. It showed Kiraan being dragged through corridors by guards, being beaten in a detention cell, being thrown at Derek's feet while the guards laughed. The timestamps showed it all happened over 4 days. This is not an accident, Qualix said coldly. This is systematic abuse of a minor. This is torture for entertainment. This is a violation of at least 17 galactic laws, including the Protection of Sentient Youth Act and the Convention Against Cruel Detention. Throck stepped forward, his voice aggressive. The silent are weak species. They serve no purpose. What does it matter if one broken child? Silence. Qualix's voice dropped to a temperature that could freeze stars. You will speak only when I ask you direct questions. Do you understand? Throck's mandibles clamped shut. He nodded once, stiffly. Qualix turned to Derek and the administrator's voice softened slightly. Human Derek Foster. You were a prisoner here for 8 months. During that time, were you aware of other incidents like this one? Derek wanted to lie. Part of him worried that telling the truth would make things worse somehow. But Kiraan squeezed his hand, trusting him to do the right thing, and he couldn't betray that trust. Yes, Derek said. I've seen prisoners beaten for entertainment. I've seen them denied medical care for injuries sustained in unsafe work conditions. 3 prisoners died in my first month here, and the supervisors didn't even report it. They just disposed of the bodies and continued operations. Qualix's 4 eyes narrowed. And the station master? Where is he during all this? In his office mostly, Derek said. He signs whatever the supervisors put in front of him and collects his salary. He doesn't run the station. They do. He gestured at Voss and Throck. The administrator was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Then Qualix activated a communication device on one wrist. Security Team Alpha, report to the station master's office immediately. I want Shift Supervisor Voss, Head Guard Throck, and all personnel involved in the detention and abuse of prisoner Kiraan Velmoth placed under arrest. Charges include torture, attempted murder, abuse of authority, and multiple violations of galactic labor and sentient rights laws. Voss lunged forward, but before he could take 2 steps, armed security officers flooded into the room. They weren't station guards. They were Galactic Commission enforcers, professionals who answered only to administrators like Qualix. Within seconds, Voss and Throck were in restraints, their mandibles clicking in impotent rage. You cannot do this. Voss shouted. This station produces more than any. This station is now under direct commission control pending investigation, Qualix interrupted. Production quotas mean nothing if they are achieved through criminal activity. Remove them. Derek watched as the supervisors who'd made his life hell for 8 months were dragged from the room. He felt Kiraan trembling beside him, and he gently picked her up despite the pain in his ribs. She buried her face in his shoulder. Qualix approached them carefully. Child, what is your full name? Kiraan lifted her head slightly. Kiraan Velmoth, she whispered. From Silent Prime. Colony 7. The administrator's expression shifted to something that might have been sadness. Your colony reported you missing 4 months ago. Your family believes you died in a transport raid. Tears welled up in Kiraan's violet eyes. My family alive? My mother? My father? Very much alive, Quaylex said gently. And they will be overjoyed to know you survived. I will contact them immediately. Kiraan started crying in earnest then, but these were different tears than Derek had seen before. These were tears of relief and joy and hope. He held her close and let her cry, his own eyes burning. Over the next few hours, Station Omega-7 transformed. Commission investigators swarmed through every level, documenting abuses and interviewing prisoners. Medical teams treated injuries that had been ignored for months or years. The old station master was removed from his position and placed under house arrest pending trial. Derek sat in a clean medical bay, receiving proper treatment for the first time since his capture. A skilled helix doctor worked on him while Kiraan sat in a chair nearby, refusing to leave his side even when offered food and comfortable quarters. Quaylex found them there as the doctor was finishing up. Derek Foster, the administrator said. According to our records, you were taken from a civilian transport 8 months ago by raiders who sold you to this station. You are a qualified trauma surgeon from Earth, correct? Yes, Derek confirmed. I was traveling to a colony medical facility when we were attacked. The raiders who took you have been identified and are being pursued, Quaylex said. As for you, you are free to go. The Commission will arrange transport to any destination you choose, with full compensation for your wrongful imprisonment. You may also pursue legal action against those responsible. Derek nodded slowly, processing this. Freedom. After 8 months of hell, he was actually free. He could go home. He could see Sarah again. He could return to his life. He looked at Kiraan, who was watching him with wide, worried eyes. What about the other prisoners? Derek asked. The ones who stood up for me. The ones who've been here for years under these conditions. Quaylex's expression was grave. Most are here legally, serving sentences for various crimes. However, I am ordering a full review of their cases and their treatment. Those who were wrongfully detained will be freed. Those who remain will be transferred to proper facilities where galactic labor laws are enforced. This station's operation model will be completely restructured. That could take months, Derek said. Yes, Quaylex agreed. Perhaps longer. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and made a decision that surprised even himself. I'd like to stay, he said. As medical officer. These prisoners need proper health care, and the transition period is going to be difficult. I can help. Quaylex's 4 eyes blinked in surprise. You wish to remain on the station that imprisoned you? I wish to help the people who became my friends here, Derek corrected. The ones who risked everything to stand with me. And I want to make sure the new system actually works, that it's actually better. Someone needs to advocate for them. The administrator studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. I will arrange a proper contract with fair compensation and full authority to implement medical protocols. You will report directly to me during the transition. 3 days later, a small silent transport docked at the station. Derek stood in the docking bay, his ribs still wrapped but healing, and watched as Kiraan's family rushed aboard. Her mother saw her first. The woman's cry of joy echoed through the bay as she ran forward and swept Kiraan into her arms. Her father was right behind, wrapping them both in an embrace. Kiraan was crying and laughing at the same time, speaking rapid silent that Derek couldn't understand but whose meaning was clear enough. Finally, Kiraan's mother approached Derek. She was tall and elegant, her patterns glowing with intense emotion. She placed both hands on his shoulders and spoke in accented but clear English. You saved my daughter. You risked your life for her when no one else would. How can I ever repay you? Derek shook his head. You don't need to repay me. Seeing her safe and happy is enough. But Kiraan's father stepped forward, his expression serious. On our world, we have a saying, a life saved creates a bond deeper than blood. You are family now, Derek Foster. And my family does not forget its debts. Over the following months, Derek learned what that meant. The Velmoth family used their considerable influence on Silent Prime to pressure the Galactic Commission for faster reforms. They funded legal aid for wrongfully detained prisoners. They publicized Derek's story and Kiraan's rescue, turning it into a rallying cry for better treatment of workers across frontier stations. Kiraan herself became a symbol. She spoke at galactic forums about her experience, about the human who chose compassion over survival, about how one person's courage could inspire many. She was young, but her words carried weight that politicians and administrators couldn't ignore. Derek stayed on Station Omega-7 through its transformation. He built a proper medical facility, He trained staff. He advocated for the prisoners who had no voice. And slowly, painfully, the station changed from a place of cruelty into something that resembled actual justice. 1 year after Qualix's arrival, Derek stood in his medical bay and looked around at the clean, well-equipped space. Merrick worked as his assistant now, having discovered a talent for medicine. The old Krellian had been freed and chosen to stay on as an advocate for worker rights. Dozens of prisoners had been released or transferred to better facilities. The door slid open and Kiraan walked in. She was taller now, healthier, her patterns glowing bright and strong. She visited every month, making the journey from Silent Prime to check on Derek and continue her advocacy work. "Hello, my friend," she said in perfect English, smiling warmly. "How are you?" Derek smiled back. "I'm good. Really good. The Commission just approved funding for 3 more stations to adopt our medical and worker protection model," Kiraan said excitedly. "Your model, Derek? The one you built here?" "Our model," Derek corrected. "This wasn't just me." Kiraan hugged him tightly. "You showed me that strength is not just surviving. It is choosing kindness when cruelty is easier. You showed a whole galaxy that truth. That is the human way, yes." Derek thought about the choice he'd made a year ago, when they'd thrown a broken child at his feet and expected him to do nothing. He thought about everything that choice had cost him and everything it had created. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's the human way." And in that moment, standing in the medical bay of a station that had once been hell but was now becoming something better, Derek Foster knew he'd made the right choice. Not just for Kiraan but for himself. For all of them. Because some things were worth more than survival. Some things were worth risking everything for. Compassion. Dignity. Hope. The simple, primitive, beautiful idea that every life mattered, and that caring for each other was the greatest strength any being could possess.